Hello and welcome to another video from Flash Jazz Cat. And as you can see on the desk here, we have an Atari 130XE. You've seen it before. I made a video about this in December last year. It's a Rapidus machine, or Rapidus, whatever you want to call it. I like calling it Rapidus. It's just stuck for some reason. Spoiler alert, anyway, the system worked reasonably well. It had the various little quirks that Rapidus systems always have. Generally it was usable. I tested it with a side 3.0 cartridge, this one, and it worked okay. There's a few little glitches, but I think that's to be expected. We know how difficult it is to stabilize all these different devices together, particularly on machines with a CPU accelerator like this, so that all turned out reasonably well. And then I closed down for Christmas and New Year. I got the flu. I was just completely exhausted, wrecked for weeks and weeks on end. And eventually I've had things to do on the house and stuff like that, but eventually, finally, I've got back to the desk. A lot of the tools I was using to put the cooker hood up in the kitchen were dispersed all over the house, so I've had to find them, put them back in the usual places. I've got a new mat, so we're back on it. But before we do that, a word from our sponsor, PCBWay. Now, PCBWay have over 10 years of experience in the field of PCB prototyping and manufacture. They also have an excellent online quote system which can provide a response within as little as 24 hours. As well as this, they provide services such as CNC machining and 3D printing. Moreover, in the community project section, you can find all of Candelo Sin's Atari projects, including version 3.3 of the Side 3 cartridge, the previous version having been discontinued by Atari last year. So if you're in need of a prototype PCB or any of the other services on offer, why not pop down to PCBWay today? And of course, this poor customer's machine's been sitting here for 7 weeks or more now, while we get through Christmas and flu and all sorts of stuff like that. And finally I've got it back on the desk. All I intended to do the other day when I started working on the thing was to finish it off, update the Ultimate 1MB plugins so that we've got the Rapidus plugin, we've got the Side 3 plugin, because the customer is a Side 3 user, and the plugin for the Pokémax board. Check everything out, make sure nothing's going to come adrift in transit, box the machine up, get a shipping quote, get paid, end of story. But of course, it wasn't that simple, was it? I was chatting to the owner last night, I think it was actually, and he asked me if I had his Side 3 cartridge, if he'd sent it in. He couldn't remember whether he'd sent it in or not, and he hadn't. And he found it eventually at home. He needs it. I think he's going to some gathering or something where he needs his bits and pieces. So I asked him what kind of Side 3 it actually is. Unfortunately, he doesn't have the Side 3.2, thank God. And it's not a Side 3.0, it's a Side 3.1, and you can tell the Side 3.1 because it's got a black PCB. And this is the one that introduced 8 megabytes of SRAM rather than 2 megabytes. And there were some other changes as well, some of which haven't actually been exploited yet, like support for the Side 3 wing, which never saw the light of day. Without wishing to disclose my sources, but it seems that the Atari was actually pretty reluctant to proceed with things like the Side 3 wing and even the external Ultimate 1MB. So there was really no sense of urgency with those new designs, because of course it was going to impact sales of the Ultimate 1MB, because it was basically going to put the same functionality into a removable cartridge with an extra connection to the ECI bus. And it's quite likely that Ultimate 1MB sales would be impacted by that, because this solution would be more portable. Well, he certainly won't be selling external Ultimate 1MB or Side 3 with the Side 3 wing anytime soon, because all those designs have been taken away now. So he's completely fucked himself there.
Fuck's sake. I'm not sure if FJC fully understands what happens next.
Anyway, the customer has a Side 3.1, so I thought what would be a good idea to test it with my Side 3.1, just to make sure there were no stability problems and that sort of thing. So let me show you what happens. So things looked okay at first. The machine works reasonably well without the cartridge attached. So if we get into the... here we go, we've got a problem. This was happening now and again, sort of a brown screen and the text's all messed up. But that would sort of go away. I was a little bit alarmed by this. It didn't happen when I was demoing the machine in December. So let's jump straight into the... Oh dear. Right, let's... I'd be surprised if I can actually get it to work as well as it did last night now, but we'll try. Well, it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to replicate the issue on video, typical, but I did take a couple of photos last night of the state of the side 3 loader, which I'll flash up on the screen. My immediate assumption was that it was side 3.1, because the hardware is a little bit different to side 3.0, which seemed to work well in the video, having a problem with the Rapidus. So I pulled the Rapidus out the machine completely. I tried this cartridge with or without Rapidus. Exactly the same results occurred. Absolute garbage on the loader menu screen, and I thought, oh no, what the hell has happened now? Have the ribbon cables failed on the Ultimate 1MB? I'm going to have to make a new set of them. What the hell is going on? I tried putting the original 74LS08 chip back in. It didn't make any difference. And I thought, what on earth's going on here? So what I eventually did, of course, is unplug the machine. So I'll unplug the machine anyway and take the board out, and I will show you what I discovered. The only reason I found this problem is because I've got a roll call of issues, a list of potential issues, and since I was having the same problem with both generations of cartridge, I thought, have we got a problem with the cartridge port? So let me show you what we've got. So here we are, here's our cartridge port, and when I flip the board over, sure enough, look at this. So this is the top row. Obviously when the cartridge plugs into this connector here, so there's the cartridge, you've got pads on both sides of the board there, and those pads line up with these 2 rows of contacts, and they're springy contacts as well. They've got little lugs on them that stop them springing down too far on the vertical plane there. So when the cartridge goes into the little slot there, it pushes in here and it rests on the top and the bottom spring, and it'll push them ever so slightly out of the way, and the springiness maintains the contact on the pads. So at this end here, what we've got, and you have to wonder how the thing worked at all in the first place when I was initially working on it. The top spring there, what I think's happened, because just inserting a cartridge normally, it would be impossible to inflict this kind of damage unless the cartridge was actually broken itself. So the top spring, the springs are in 2 parts of course, and that doubly ensures a good connection. But we've only got one of the top contacts up here. We've got the 2 on the bottom, but the one on the left's pushed out of the way. So that in itself wouldn't necessarily cause a problem. But the other top spring contact on the left, at some point, I think probably something's been poked in the back of the machine, and the little lug that stops this contact from slipping down has somehow managed to get itself underneath there. And of course, once it does that, it's prone to a sort of blunt force impact from anything that you actually put in the cartridge. And what you probably find now is that it's actually shorting out the address bus. And of course, I have to wonder if this problem, which I didn't know about, actually had impacts on the RAM issue that resulted in me having to do all this extra work with the RAM. Right, this is the Atari 130XE schematic here, and this shows the cartridge connector over on the left. So you can see all the address lines and data lines. But the problem we've got here is that the 2 pins that are actually bent and touching one another are pins 1 and A, which actually equates to S4 and RD4, which are 2 critical cartridge sense signals. So that kind of explains why we're getting serious problems with cartridges with the side 3. So yeah, we're going to need to fix that. So obviously we can't leave it like that, we're going to have to fix it. I don't think it's going to be easy to retrieve that broken pin from inside the connector. It would be nice to think I could. I'll have a look at it with the magnifier and see what we can do. I just don't like it. I've managed to get that left spring contact up above the plastic lip there, but it's pretty much impossible to get the shape of the spring contact back the way it was. Inclined to replace the whole connector if I can find a decent donor part. I would feel happier about that, because I just think this is just an accident waiting to happen again. You could actually replace the pin if you took the 2 pins out and were able to extract them from the connector, but I don't know, I just think it's going to be a weak spot. I'm going to have a look next door and see if I've got a donor board with a suitable connector on it. Well, I found this one. This board must have really done something to annoy me. It must have been one of those unfixable ones because I actually put a hammer through the RAM. Oh god, that's turbo dead, that one. So the cartridge and the ECI connector on the back look fine. So let's take that off, take the bad one off the other computer. So of course I'll have to take the Rapidus off to safely work on the back of the board. I really went for it with this. Yes, this is what my Atari hobby turned into eventually. Just abject misery and frustration. Oh dear, and it shows no signs of changing. But never mind, so let's turn the desoldering station on, turn the soldering iron on. We will do the best job we possibly can to get this off the board in one piece. And I'm going to, of course, all the pins on the back are bent over. So I'm going to straighten them so I can get the desoldering gun on them. It's interesting Atari made no effort whatsoever to trim the legs on these things. That one's snapped off. Okay, they're all straight enough. So let's add a little bit more solder to them. Put some flux on the board. Right, so I've got the bulk of the solder out the holes here, but I'm going to go over it as well with some wick. Because I don't want any of the legs to bind on the board when I try and fish the connector out. I don't care what happens to this board, obviously, because it's destroyed. I don't want to damage the legs of the connector any more than I have to. Of course, the whole thing's hot, so it may actually release from the via and then reattach itself when you move on to the next pin. But this is... generally speaking, this kind of works, and if you get the odd one that's sticky, you can usually flick it off with a screwdriver or a knife or something, just so the whole thing comes out. But I'll go over both sides as well. I'm just trying to get out as much solder as I possibly can, and then of course when I take this off, I'm going to straighten these legs up as well. Well, I can really labour the point on this board because, as I say, I don't care what happens to the board. And on the target machine, of course, I do care about the board, but I don't care about the connector because the connector's already broken. Right, so we're at the point now where we can at least explore whether or not this is ready to come off. And it doesn't feel like it is. Oh, alright, eventually got this out with the help of the hot air. It's not very, very pretty, but I think we can tidy it up. We'll shorten those bent legs on the bottom. Hopefully it'll be okay. Great, so I've got the connector off the target machine. I've got the donor connector. Make sure I don't get them mixed up. Now the problem with this thing here, the spare part, is that these things are difficult enough to get to line up even when the legs aren't all bent, and they're difficult to straighten because they're springy metal. So actually getting this in here so that all the pins go through all the holes is going to be extremely fiddly, but it's what we've got to do anyway, and I think it'll work nicely. So I'll just clean this part of the board up a little bit. No broken traces, which is good. Okay, quick inspection of the top. Everything looks fine. So right now we've got to thread this through here. I'm going to have to meditate on this with the magnifier. Oh my god, what a job. Right, so they're all in, and I haven't soldered in yet, and if I knock this out somehow by accident, they'll be all hell to pay. But I just wanted to show you before I do the soldering on here. There was one was a little bit misaligned on the inner row, but the inner row went in pretty easily actually. So then it was a case of making sure these all popped in before I pushed the connector down. And it's made a little bit more difficult by the fact that a couple of the legs are a bit short there, so I just had to be triply certain that everything had at least something poking through the via, and it appears that they do. So I'm going to go ahead and solder this in. You see it's got the 3 orientation lugs for alignment. So I'm going to solder this up with the magnifier, so I'll show you what the result is in a minute. Okay, the connector's soldered on. I've reattached these little wires that I had in position beforehand, and I've done what Atari didn't feel it necessary to do, is I've trimmed the legs on the bottom here, more or less flush with the board, so they won't bend. So for any reason this job like this has to be done again, you're not going to have those awkward lengths of springy metal to contend with when you're trying to desolder the part. So if I put the Rapidus back in the machine now, hopefully it should work, or it should work better than it did. Otherwise this whole thing has been a complete and utter waste of time. So let's pop this in here, put this wire back on. I'll put it in the bottom of the case. So we'll try it without the cartridge first, just to make sure the machine boots. And I wanted to see no more of those weird video issues, either no video or a sort of brown screen. I want all that to go away, otherwise I can't ship this machine back to its owner. Okay, it's turning on now. Have we got video? Oh god. Oh, we've got video. For some reason it's taken a long time for this TV to sync to the video signal. I don't know what that's all about, but is it going to boot? What the hell? Yes, indeed it was a little bit of dirt on the cartridge contacts on the fresh connector I've just put on the board. Right. Let's see if this is working again. So at least the loader appears to be working now. Oh, that's good. That's better. That's better. Right, we'll get back in here again. Does everything look okay? Yes, that's more or less how I would expect it to be. We'll try Space Harrier again, because that was quite a good test. So this is using the same side 3 as the customer has. That's looking reasonably good. There's still something a little bit off about this. I'll give the customer the original 74LS08 chip as well as the F08 chip I've put in it. In case he wants to try that, he might have a different result. Let's have another look in the loader. This is of course at high speed 20 megahertz mode. I don't suppose this will work. It still has, so brilliant, brilliant. Oh, that's good. That's not too bad. It's just something a little bit... I'm always on edge when we're running the Rapidus core here, because I'm just waiting for the machine to fall down, basically. But it works a lot better than it did before when I've got the side 3 cartridge in. Haven't seen any video problems since I reseated the Spectre board, so I'm going to have a good look at that before the machine ships off. So I'm expecting to see the boot screen again when I turn it on, which I do, through the legacy video signal. That's looking okay. So, could this be it? I've really spent enough time on this machine now. If I could find some contact cleaner, I would spray it in the back of that cartridge connector anyway. Perhaps I'll suggest to the owner that he could do that if he has any problems. But I just removed the cartridge several times on the connector, and it just took the surface oxidization off the spring contacts, and seems to work now. The funny thing about Rapidus, you know, I'm going to flash the screenshots up on the screen. I've been dying to mention this, absolutely dying to mention it. Because, you know, I've made a few videos featuring Rapidus because people keep sending me them to put them in bloody machines. But I noticed one of the Polish forums the other day, there was a thread started by Konrad, or Draco030 as you know him. He's a member of the DLT team, and I was speaking about him in very complimentary terms in one of the previous videos. He's actually started a thread. He's observed that there's a Rapidus core which actually drives the system at 40 megahertz rather than 20 megahertz. And obviously Conrad's a Rapidus user. He wrote this firmware with the menu here. He's apparently bought a thermometer because he's observed overheating, which causes stability problems on this 40 megahertz Rapidus, and he's conducting all sorts of tests, having observed a correlation between overheating and stability. And I found that very amusing, because back in 2017 or so, I very quickly observed a correlation, not necessarily a causation, but certainly a correlation between the actual temperature of the 6502 itself on the Rapidus, one of which being the unwanted spontaneous cold reboot when you press the reset key expecting a warm reset. Say from the Sparta-DOS X prompt, the machine would actually, instead of just clearing the screen and resetting, it would actually go through the whole boot process again. And that would tend to happen after the operating temperature of the system had reached a certain level. I didn't measure it. But I thought it very ironic that he's actually, what is it now, 8 years later, he's come out and said he's gone out and bought a thermometer because there seems to be a correlation between the temperature. I think in his case it was just the ambient temperature of the Rapidus itself, or the system. He seemed to indicate that the ambient temperature was contributed to by, of course, the rest of the chipset as well. I quite ambitiously put it in a 1200 XL, found it to have a lot of problems. And then I put it in a 130XE, deliberately with no other upgrades in it whatsoever, just a stock 130XE, because it was at first he was saying, well, it's not designed for XLs, it's not designed to go in 1200 XLs or 800 XLs, it's designed for an XE. Well, that's why it's called Rapidus XE. So yes, very amusing to see that the issue of temperature has come up again. But anyway, and I go and change this to classic. Fortunately, we don't really need to use classic mode because we can just shut off the Rapidus entirely. So that's the workaround for this particular issue. But classic mode exists anyway, and it would be very useful, of course, for systems that don't have the ability to unground that control signal to the board in software. You'd have to have a switch on the back or something. So if we reboot the system, and so now we're in classic mode as it's described, and this is running at stock speed basically, so largely, generally speaking, it should behave like a compatibility mode basically, if you like. So let's press the reset key. Oh, so on this machine we don't even appear to suffer from the problem of the spontaneous reboots in classic mode. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Brilliant, something's improved. That's just absolutely great. So if that's one less little issue for the owner to have to deal with. If that's somehow been fixed, that's marvellous news. And of course, if that's the case, it means that we don't need things like the O2 fixer on the machine in order to get around that problem. You can't have it both ways. You either have a determinate fix that corrects the issues, or you don't need those things at all. Very, very strange. So we don't appear to have the unwanted cold reset issue with this particular computer. It's the first one I've seen that doesn't, but that's most welcome that we're not seeing it there. But yeah, classic mode, perfectly usable on this one, so that's an absolute channel first. I hope you found that one interesting. I know it's a machine that's been previously featured, but I was so aggravated when I discovered the damage on the cartridge connector last night that I thought, oh, I'll make a video out of this one because at least it's been worth something. Please leave your comments below whether it's about Rapidus or anything else you've seen in the video. It's a strange thing, Rapidus. It just became so incredibly contentious. So what I think we've got here is the first machine I've had through my hands. Maybe it's got something to do with the SRAM board, I don't know. But this particular machine is behaving pretty well. Certainly the best one I've ever had, and I've installed Rapidus in probably at least 10 machines over the years. Probably more than that actually, and in every single instance, doesn't matter whether it was an XE, it doesn't matter what else it had in it. Normally they would have an ultimate in them, it has to be said, but we'd have that problem, and here we don't appear to have that problem. So, and that is a good thing. In this particular instance, all I've done is put a 74F08 chip in place of the 74LS08 chip, and the CPU is an NCR as well. They are the recommended CPUs for Rapidus systems, so just absolutely great. Does the side 3 loader work well in classic mode as well? It's funny because there's one particular commentator that seems to think that the latest side 3 loader is completely incompatible with Rapidus, but here we say it working perfectly well. Isn't that strange? See, that's what I mean. There's so much one-upmanship and gainsaying about this particular piece of hardware. But let's see if we can run Space Harrier in classic mode on the Rapidus, and we can, from a side 3 cartridge with an ultimate 1MB on the system. Well, what more can I say? What more can I say? I will leave it at that. And again, thank you very much for watching. Sincerest thanks to the patrons and everybody else who offers their support. It is genuinely appreciated. All being well, I will see you in the next video, so bye bye for now.